Hello, everyone. This is Lauren Steiner, and welcome to tonight's edition, the first 2023 edition of the Robust Opposition. I'm really thrilled to have as my guest what is called a friend of the show, Ryan Grimm, because he's been on the show multiple times. And he is the DC Bureau Chief of the Intercept, which had some breaking news today. We'll discuss at the end of the show, as well as the co-host of Counterpoint on Breaking Points, which is a new news service started by Crystal Ball and Sagar and Jetty. How you doing, Ryan? Did you have a good New Year?
New Year was fine. How about yours?
It was good, very uneventful. But you were New Year's for you was followed by this very exciting speakers fight that we're going to talk about. And let's get right into it, because I know you don't have a lot of time today. So this is the first time in 100 years that a speaker for the House was not confirmed on the first ballot. And I would like you to start by talking about Kevin McCarthy. Who were the people that were opposed to him? The never Kevin people. Some of them were never Kevin, and some of them obviously could be swayed. Why didn't they like him, and what did they want?
I mean, some of them don't like him personally. He is a polarizing figure. His extreme ambition and his willingness to just wear it on his sleeve kind of, rubs some Republicans the wrong way. So some of it is that, and they wanted somebody who, and then they blended that into trustworthiness. They would say that we don't trust him, and we don't trust him because he's been a part of the machine. He's been a part of the Republican establishment his entire life. We want a kind of true believer who's a leader of the conservative movement. Others, and you had a split between Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert here. Marjorie Taylor Greene said, "Look, I pushed Kevin McCarthy on all of these different issues. I wanted investigations into the FBI, into the CIA, into Hunter Biden. I wanted a seat on the oversight committee. I wanted, she listed a whole host of things, and he gave me those things. And in exchange for those concessions, I am voting for Kevin McCarthy." The others, Lauren Boebert, Matt Gaetz, and a number of other Freedom Caucus members, said that they wanted, additional concessions. Some of it around the rules, allowing, a single member of Congress to file a motion to vacate, which would basically be a motion that would force a vote on Kevin McCarthy being Speaker at any time. They also were pushing for some type of a deal around the debt ceiling, that insisting that McCarthy use the debt ceiling as leverage to get spending cuts the same way that Republicans did back in 2011. Now that kind of, a lot of people have seen that as kind of a fake concession, because what did you think Republicans were going to do? Like, there's Mitch McConnell, McCarthy, Paul Ryan, like John Boehner, like Republicans from the center to the far right, all have always used the debt ceiling as a way to try to get concessions on spending out of Democrats. So, like, getting Kevin McCarthy to agree that, okay, I will do that, it's not, would be like getting, say, Nancy Pelosi or Hakeem Jeffries to agree, not to cut Social Security at this point. Like, a little while ago, they were open to cutting Social Security, but now they're all on board for making sure that Social Security does not get cut. And so it'd be like making them promise that they're going to do something that they're already going to do. Gaetz also got a concession. He said in a Twitter Spaces interview that there would be no retribution or retaliation against the people who came after Kevin McCarthy. Does that answer your question? What else are you curious about the kind of critics?
Well, I wanted to just go over these concessions as Sahil Kapoor, tweeted them out, to figure out how many. You've already alluded to one that you don't think is very consequential, but some of the other.
I think it's consequential, but I don't think they want it, if you know what I mean.
Right. Okay. So one member can force vote to overthrow the speaker. So that sounds to me like everything. He's going to be very beholden to them, and he's got to consult with them before he puts forth anything, which makes it kind of a weak speaker. And it was really interesting because I listened to Breaking Points today, and they were saying that the strong speakership really is only in the 20th century, starting with Tip O'Neill. But for most of history, we haven't had a strong speaker. So what is your thoughts on that? Which do you think is better, more democratic, and which do you think is better for getting things done? And they may not be the same.
Right. Yeah. Like a lot of people don't even know this. Like Henry Clay was elected speaker as a freshman in the House of Representatives, something like 1812 or something like that, because it was such a weak position. Like nobody wanted it, and it's like, all right, I'll do it. And so Henry Clay, like, yeah, okay, fine. And it gradually over the next 200 years took on more power. For a long time, the chairman of the committees, and there weren't chairwomen. They were actual chairmen of the committees. Ruled in a way that was independent of the Speaker of the House and even of the Majority Leader. That had a lot to do with the seniority system, particularly the one that was upheld by Democrats in the 20th century with these old bulls, these kind of Dixiecrats down in the South, who, when you come from a one-party area, which the South was just pure Democratic, like a lot of times Republicans weren't even on the ballot in the South. That meant that you could serve in Congress for 50 years, and by your 30th year, you're chairman of the Armed Services Committee, you're chairman of Ways and Means, and you hold on to that power. And it took the kind of Watergate crisis and then the Watergate wave, which brought in a bunch of kind of technocratic, neoliberal, progressive Democrats in 1974 who really kind of went after the old bull system. And what they didn't necessarily realize at the time, but maybe should have, is that they weren't going to just kind of gradually decentralize power away from the committee chairs to the rank and file members. What they did is they created a vacuum, and then power gravitated toward the top, and you saw that continuing over the next several decades. And with Tom DeLay, who wasn't Speaker but as Majority Leader, kind of brought a lot of power into his hands, followed by Nancy Pelosi, really kind of making it an extraordinarily powerful institution. And we'll see if this weakens it or not. Previously in 2006, when Pelosi was made Speaker, that this rule was in place. Just one person could do a motion to vacate. But the idea that you would do it wasn't really in circulation at the time. It was only after the Tea Party came in and basically took John Boehner out that this weapon started being used started kind of transforming the House.
Yeah. Now, the other one is changes pay go to cut go. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, and they did exactly this when they took over in 2010. So pay go, this is a Nancy Pelosi, there's one of her favorite things. Like, she implemented pay go in 2007 when she took over the first time. What that meant is that if you have new spending, then you have to offset that new spending either with tax increases somewhere or spending cuts somewhere else. And so what Republicans are doing, and this last Congress, there was an exemption to pay-go that covered anything for the climate and anything that had to do with coronavirus. So basically, pay-go was not in effect for the last 2 years, because it's very easy to say that anything you're doing, is covered by either the pandemic or climate. The American Rescue Plan, the Inflation Reduction Act, all of these different spending packages were not subject to pay-go because of that. And that was a concession, actually, that the Progressive Caucus won. What Republicans did in 2011, what they did again this time, they say, okay, now if you're going to do a spending increase, you have to offset that with cuts elsewhere. You cannot raise taxes to pay for a spending increase. So that's what cut go is.
Now, isn't that the same as sequestration?
Sequestration says this is the spending level, and it cannot go up.
For some reason, right. I thought it.
It's in the same vein. Yeah.
Okay, so now this term here, constrains debt limit end runs. Now you sort of talked about that. You said that really wasn't a concession because what are they going to do? They always fold at the end with that debt ceiling. But you know, it's interesting. Why do you think, if this was such a concern, why do you think the Democrats didn't try to raise the debt ceiling during the lame duck session? And also, what do you think of Dave Dayen's idea that all Janet Yellen has to do is issue $1 trillion bill?
Yeah, coin. Weirdly, it has to be a coin.
Okay.
Because it's through the U.S. Mint. But you're right. It would be, people call it a platinum coin. It could be nickel, anything. It could be anything. And the Treasury would then, deem it to be worth $1 trillion. The Treasury would then, deposit it in the Federal Reserve and would have $1 trillion to spend. That's correct. And frankly, of the various options, that's probably the one that is the kind of most constitutional there. But there are others where you could just say, we have the authority to borrow implicitly based on the fact that Congress has authorized and appropriated spending. Like, we have to spend the money. We can't just not do it. We're the executive. We have to execute. So there are a variety of ways you could go about it. And I think they should. I think they should not enter into negotiations with the Freedom Caucus over the debt ceiling, because you're not getting anything.
Why do you think they didn't try to pass an increase during the lame duck?
Biden called it irresponsible back in October. I think you might have had a Manchin and Sinema problem. I think it was a deeply irresponsible thing for Democrats to not do, to leave that in the hands of Republicans. In 2010, they didn't do it in the lame duck because they stupidly and wrongly thought that Democrats would be able to use the debt in order to get some concessions out of Republicans, because Republicans would need to raise the debt limit and they would need Democratic votes to do it because the Tea Party wouldn't do it. That turned out to be idiotic. It was idiotic from the beginning, but it turned out that Republicans were able to use the debt limit standoff to get concessions out of Democrats, and caused a market crash, caused a downgrade of U.S. debt, and prolonged the recovery, and really slowed the economy down from 2011 through like 2015, 2016, in a way that rebounded to Republicans' electoral advantage in a big way. So I think that it was foolish, but I think some of it is just Biden's kind of traditionalism, his institutionalism. He's been a deficit hawk his whole life. That, like, this term where he's been spending maybe more than any president since the Great Society or the New Deal, certainly more than Obama, has been an aberration compared to his career. And I think his instincts are more toward the center or the right on deficit hawkery. So I think that played some role in it, but I think it was a huge mistake. They should have just bit the bullet, just eliminate the debt ceiling. You could raise it. You don't even have to eliminate it. You could just raise it $100 trillion.
Yeah.
Like the debt limit is $100 trillion. If you don't want to straight up eliminate it, but to leave it in the hands of this crew that we saw, working their will in the House the last week is going to come back to bite us all probably over the next 6 months.
And nobody talks about modern monetary theory, which is basically, Stephanie Kelton was an advisor to Bernie Sanders, basically saying that the debt and the deficit aren't even a problem if you print your own currency. But I don't want to get into that.
The mint the coin idea flows out of that a little bit, but this is statutory. Like, the debt limit is statutory, so it might like, you can say the debt and deficit don't matter, but it says that the fact that they've written it into law means that it does matter, unless Biden says no, this law is unconstitutional, I'm not following it.
Yeah. Now this next one seems like a pretty significant concession, that you need a 3/5 vote to raise taxes, because we know that the Republicans don't want to raise taxes, and certainly it could affect if you put that with the pay go and the cut go, it could cause cuts if you can't raise the taxes. So can you comment if you think that's a significant one?
I feel like that's pretty standard Republican operating procedure at this point. I don't know if they would have had to shake the trees to get that out of McCarthy. Like, McCarthy doesn't want to raise taxes. Nobody in the Republican Party, certainly with a Democrat in the White House, is going to want to, raise taxes. They didn't do it when. Now they would need. They do want to close the SALT loophole. So that's kind of interesting. I wonder if they, that's the in Paul Ryan's tax plan. The SALT deduction was taken out, which is, if you're kind of a wealthy homeowner or even a middle class homeowner in like in a high priced area like New Jersey or New York or somewhere like that, you lost a significant deduction. So let's see what that. So bringing that back. I guess bringing that back would be a tax cut, so they could. I guess they'd be okay with that. Well, yeah, I don't know. What do you think? I mean, I like Republicans aren't going to raise taxes the next 2 years anyway. So,
well, I guess what I'm assuming that when they talk about raising it to that, they only needed a 51% vote. If they're now talking, it needs to be a 60%. And with the Congress so evenly divided, they might have been able to come up with that. So that's
right. Maybe. So it's good to lock it in. Like if progressives could lock into the rules that say you need 60 votes to cut Medicare, 60% to cut Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, etc. That would be, even though Democrats weren't about to do that, it'd be good to just have it in.
Yeah, well, I want to get to what Democrats aren't about to do in a couple minutes, but first I want to go through this other thing. So allows 2-minute votes. What does that mean?
The shortest votes used to be 5 minutes. This is just kind of a procedural thing. It used to be that, so you'd have a 5-minute vote, and everybody would have 5 minutes to cast their vote. Now they've reduced that number to 2 minutes. So it allows things to move a little bit faster. You could have, whereas before in 20 minutes, you could have 4 votes. Now you could have 10 votes. They also, and you might be getting to this one, passed a germaneness, single issue thing in the rules where your bill is supposed to only be one issue rather than like hundreds. And so the idea is, now you're going to make us do a lot more bills. And so the idea is, let us do them faster at least so we can get in and out.
Yeah, no, I don't see that one on here. The next one I have is 72 hours for bills. I suppose that's also shortening it, right?
Well, what that means is that you have to get a notice, at least 3 days notice of. Oh
yeah, that I thought was a good one. I thought that was a good concession because people.
Yeah, and everybody, they all promise this. Yeah, totally. And then watch McCarthy will drop something like 2 hours notice.
Right. So then, what does dynamic scoring mean?
That means if Republicans pass a tax cut, let's say they introduce a bill that cuts taxes for the super rich. What they want is one of their ideological economists to be able to say this tax cut doesn't actually raise the deficit. Even though it gives $2 trillion to the rich, it will create so much economic opportunity and so much growth that actually cutting taxes will bring money in, and there'll be more taxes. And so therefore we can't get hit for raising the deficit as a result. So it's like allowing them to use wishful thinking when it comes to their, which I support using dynamic scoring, because let's say it's the shoes on the other foot and you want to do $1 trillion climate investment. And with a static analysis, you'd say, well, that's adding $1 trillion to the deficit. You say, well, wait a minute, let's talk to some economists here, some progressive economists here about whether or not this is going to kickstart economic growth. It's going to reduce the cost that you pay for dirty energy and on and on. And as a result, you actually bring in more tax revenue. And so therefore it's actually a deficit neutral ability to like invest in your economy. So I'm actually okay. Like, I think dynamic scoring is good.
The way you describe it. And
it comes down to whether or not you're being honest about it or not.
Now, what does this mean? What is the significance of changing Education Labor Committee to Education and Workforce?
They hate labor. They hate Yeah.
Wanted to name labor
Yeah.
out of there.
And they did that. They did that in 2011 when they took over too. Yeah, they just don't like unions. They don't like labor, little labor, big labor. They don't like any labor.
Yeah.
And so they just stripped the word right out of there. They did that on the Senate side with health, education, labor, and pensions. They changed. I forget
yeah.
I forget what they changed it to, but they took labor out of there.
Yeah, that's Bernie's committee.
Just workforces. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just work. Like they just want, yeah.
And so they got a new COVID select committee. What is that supposed to do? Is that supposed to?
That'll dig into, Fauci. It'll dig into the CDC, all of the things that you've seen on kind of conservative media over the last 2 years, the grievances around the pandemic, those will be worked out through that committee.
Yeah, well, they seem to have a lot of oversight stuff they want to do. They're not talking about anything they want to accomplish, but they just want to look into everything the Biden administration did. Now, the thing that's worrisome to me is about cutting Social Security and Medicare, because you and I remember that this almost happened under Obama. He established the Simpson Bowles Commission, which was advised by the Peterson Foundation. Pete Peterson's lifelong goal to eliminate Social Security. And they had recommended that they were going to change the index by which the increases were going to be made from the COLA to the chain CPI. Now, that's enough to put anybody to sleep. Nobody knows what that means, but it was in effect a cut to Social Security. And the only reason it didn't happen was it wasn't a big enough cut. So we know that Biden was part of an administration that was willing to do this. We know that this is something that the Republicans want to do. Do you think that these concessions or any of these concessions make this any more likely to happen?
To me, the biggest risk of a Biden presidency has always been his instincts around austerity. He was also, if you remember, the chair of the Biden committee, which was kind of related to and in that same milieu as the Simpson Bowles Commission. It was him and Eric Cantor, where they would sit down and come up with all these different ways that they were going to cut Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and other spending, and pair it with some what they would call revenue, which is supposed to be tax increases. Fortunately, all of that blew up, and like you said, we actually do owe the Freedom Caucus a lot of the credit for blowing that stuff up, because they wouldn't agree to even the most meager tax increases in order to get huge cuts to social spending, which actually, in hindsight, I think was a huge mistake for them, because they could have locked in their cuts to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, and then when they took power, they could just cut taxes like they did with Trump. So they lost their opportunity, and I think the political world understands at this point that it's much harder to cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid than they thought it was going to be back in 2011, 12, 13. And I think Trump actually gets some credit for that. Like he ran as a Republican saying that he's not going to cut any of that stuff, and that was I think that played a role in people, even in the Republican primary, being like, okay, I like that. I don't want these things cut.
Yeah.
Because the idea of a grand bargain was always that everybody knew it was unpopular, but they were going to do it together. And that way there would be no way for voters to take it out on either of them. Just a shockingly anti-democratic, lowercase d democratic kind of approach to governing, for them to even be talking that way out loud. Like, we're going to hurt you, but we're both going to hurt you at the same time. So you will be powerless to do anything about it. Like that was their stated goal, basically. Yeah. They failed at it. But Biden's instincts are there. If he digs back into those old instincts, then it's going to be trouble.
Well, Crystal and Sagar mentioned today that, I don't remember which poll they referenced, but they said 76% of those polls said protecting Social Security and Medicare was their number one reason for voting for Democrats. And inflation was, only fourth. So I think that's pretty significant. Now, talking about Medicare for all, I want to segue into what a lot of, podcasters, YouTubers have been saying all week, about what the Freedom Caucus did. They said that this vindicates their strategy for forcing the vote, which they presented 2 years ago when Pelosi was going to be Speaker. And for those of you who don't know what force the vote was, they were basically urging AOC and the rest of the squad to withhold their vote for Nancy Pelosi until she promised a floor vote on Medicare for all. Now, I've been an activist for Medicare for all since 2004. I used to do public speaking about California's first bill. And as an activist and an organizer for that, I thought that was a terrible idea because it would have failed. And one thing I learned in my leadership organizing and action class that Marshall Gans taught at the Kennedy School of Government was that you need incremental wins to boost morale to grow the movement. So what do you think the converse? If the thing loses, which it surely would, you know, and even Pramila Jayapal, who was the author of the bill, agreed with that analysis. And that's why she was against it. But of course, when nobody took them up on it, they started calling them fraud squad. Do you think that these concessions, or at least the fact that they were able to hold up the speakership, you don't think these concessions are that significant, but what about the tactic itself? Say the squad had used the tactic for something that was more likely to happen, like say $15 an hour. I mean, after all, Biden campaigned on $15 an hour. He didn't campaign on Medicare for all. Bernie actually did force a vote in the Senate in March on $15 an hour, which failed, probably because of the parliamentarian. But do you think that, forgetting about the fact that it was for Medicare for all, what do you think of the tactic they used? And even on Twitter, you know, yesterday, somebody was saying they should have forced the vote on Hakeem Jeffries for minority leader. So everybody's like up on this tactic now.
The tactic of using your leverage to gain concessions is a good one. It's time honored. It's been done around the speaker vote and then the subsequent rules package. And often the speaker vote is a fight over the rules package since basically the first, you know, pretty much the first Congress. Like this, every 2 years, this gets fought over. So you absolutely should do that. I think when you say it was going to fail, I think you're referring right to the actual floor vote on Medicare for all that they would have won. Yeah. So I think the misconception in comparing and saying, "Oh, look, what the Republicans are doing is what we wanted Democrats to do 2 years ago," is that if the progressives would have said, "Nancy Pelosi, we're not voting for you for Speaker until you agree to give us a vote on the floor for Medicare for all. We are holding out. All of us are united. It's not happening until you give us that vote." She would have immediately said, "Sure, take the vote. That's fine." So you wouldn't have had a week-long fight. Like you'd have to, she's fine giving that concession. And I think there are people who make the case that having the floor vote, even though you would lose by like 200 votes, is a good thing to do because it gets people active. It gets people lobbying their members of Congress. Like if you know when the vote is, let's say it's going to be end of July, and it gets scheduled in May. You've got June and May, June, and July to really hammer all of your members of Congress and say, you need to vote for this. We're watching this. Like as an organizing moment, like I can see that argument. Now, you could also organize around asking them to co-sponsor the bill. So you don't necessarily need a vote for that to happen, but a vote is something that can channel people's energy. So like, I can understand why somebody would ask for that, but it wasn't something that Pelosi was resistant to giving them. And that's what was always so confusing to me about linking this. Like we're not gonna vote for Pelosi until she gives us a Medicare for all vote. She'll give you Medicare. She'll give you one. I mean, you're supposed to go through committee and pass through committee before you get to the floor. But if like her speakership's on the line, she'll say, if you want a symbolic vote on Medicare for all that has not gone through committee and gotten a majority in committee yet, okay, fine. We'll allow that. That's fine. And you can do it as an amendment to say some healthcare bill like that. In fact, Bernie Sanders tried to get, and maybe they did end up getting a Medicare for all vote in 2009-10, and then in the House, and then I think Anthony Weiner actually pushed the vote on the floor, if you remember that. And then Bernie Sanders tried to do it as an amendment to the Affordable Care Act, and the Republicans did this real like punk move where they like insisted that the clerk read the entire bill on the floor, and it would have taken like 4 days. And they were trying to finish the Affordable Care Act, so Bernie's like, forget it. Fine, like I withdraw my amendment. But you can get a vote. Like it's not out of the realm of possibility. So all I was saying 2 years ago was like, think bigger, like have a bigger imagination about the demands you're going to make. Ask for something that is going to be painful for them to give. If you can figure out a way to get $15, like we want that as an amendment, that's going to be a 50 vote threshold in the Senate, like something like that. Like like something along those lines. And actually I had the House Republicans, the Freedom Caucus got something cool, which I was saying Democrats should have done. And then I realized I actually suggested this back in 2018, which is that a concession that Pelosi could give is to say the DCCC and the House Super PAC will no longer put its thumb on the scale in primaries. Like that's something that's within the speaker's control. And something you could demand. And they should have, I think they should have asked for something like that. Instead, there's also a misconception that they didn't ask for anything. The concessions that they demanded in exchange for their votes were around committee assignments, the number of progressives that would be on committees, and that exemption to pay-go that you and I talked about earlier, and also getting rid of what's called the motion to recommit, because that's a vote that the minority Republicans can attach to all these bills. And what Republicans kept doing is making a motion to recommit about BDS to just humiliate and make all the Democrats vote against Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib. So they wanted to get rid of the motion to recommit, basically. Or it would either be that or it'd be an anti-immigrant motion to recommit, putting Democrats on record on various immigration things. So they got rid of that. So they did demand things, but they did that. Those were what they got in exchange for their vote.
But you're saying they did this quietly in advance of the speaker vote, so they didn't have to make a public display of it.
Which is what Marjorie Taylor Greene did. Right.
Yeah. And I don't know that the public display really helps the Republicans. I mean,
we'll see. I think that I'm curious. Yeah, I'm curious for your take on that. But I think at some point we're getting to a place where people do want to see that kind of fight, to just as a demonstration that they have a voice in Congress. And I think there's more of that on the Republican side, and I think that's something that the left needs to grapple with, to reckon with. That there's a reason that Trump won the Republican primary and Bernie lost the Democratic primary. There are many reasons, but one of them is that the Republican base is much more organized and much more passionate and energized at this moment, and so as a result, and invested in politics and playing in primaries, and you don't really see that on the left as much.
Well, I always thought that it was more of a matter of like with Republicans right now. Well, with Republicans basically since Newt Gingrich, I should say, they don't want to accomplish anything. Mm-hmm. Whereas, people also criticize the squad for voting for this thing or voting for that thing, but it's because it has stuff in it. Like we could go back, we don't have time to discuss the Build Back Better and the infrastructure, holding the line. And I did criticize Ro Khanna and Pramila Jayapal for not keeping those bills linked together. Because I didn't think we were ever going to get Build Back Better. And what we got, it's not what we wanted, but there's still some good things in there. And that's the thing. They always say, look, my constituents are not going to allow me to vote for something that has the child care credit, or that has, more unemployment, whatever. There's good things in this that if I don't vote for it, that, my constituents are going to be denied it. Whereas Republicans, they don't care. They just want to blow shit up. So that's
right. There's an asymmetry there where the Republicans their policy is often to shoot the hostage. Like they're fine shooting the hostage. Whereas on the left, there's a lot more, right, like you said, soft-hearted, and they're building rather than destroying.
Yeah.
And so and then the Democratic Party leadership can use that against its left flank
Right.
very easily. Yeah.
And they have. But the other problem I thought would force the vote was they kept saying, oh, we know it's going to fail, but at least we're going to out the Democrats that don't support it. And I said, they've already outed themselves. They're the ones that refuse to co-sponsor it. So
Right.
If they were so, like they said, we'll out them and then we'll primary them. But none of them went and primaried the ones who were not for it. They could have always done that. They didn't have to.
Right. There were about 100 that haven't co-sponsored it. And Kurt Schrader was primaried, but I don't think it was by any of the people who were, agitating for that strategy. And also it's so it's crazy to still be talking about this 2 years later, but the idea, so you put Medicare for all on the floor, and if you know that it's going to, because all the Republicans are going to vote against it, so you absolutely know it's going to fail, like 100%. The bill is going to fail. That makes it a free vote.
Yeah.
So if you're a Democrat in a blue district and you're hostile to Medicare for all, but you don't want to get primaried, you don't want any problems for yourself back home, you can vote for it. There's nothing stopping you from just casting a free vote. Now you've given this corporate hack a way to say, look, I voted for this Medicare for all bill. Now a bunch of them are sponsors, for that very reason. And might drop off if it got closer to getting 218. So you always have you can't ever trust politicians in a case where their action is symbolic. And the co-sponsorship is symbolic because it's not going to become law yet, and the vote on the floor is symbolic because it's not going to pass. And so people shouldn't confuse that and think that because it's a vote, now all of a sudden they're going to find out what's in the hearts of these members of Congress.
I'm actually trying to organize an action that'll be very exciting, and I can preview it here on the show, which is to do a simultaneous occupation of every single representative's office, House of Representatives and Senate, their district offices. I tried to do this back during Occupy 10 years ago. We called it Occupy Congress. But now I'm really seriously talking to a bunch of different groups about doing it for Medicare for all. So stay tuned on that. Because it's a lot easier. Somebody wanted to do a march on Washington, but marches on Washington have become a dime a dozen. Plus, they're expensive. You have to fly there. You have to get lodging. But everybody can afford to go representative. And they've never had anything. There's never been a simultaneous.
Yeah, I mean, the closest to that was during the Affordable Care Act when Indivisible was sending people to offices. I think we might have lost Lauren. Well, so yeah.
Wait a minute, I dropped out for a second. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I was saying the closest that we've had to that is during the remember the fight over the Affordable Care Act, where Republicans were trying to repeal the Affordable Care Act in late 2017. Throughout 2017, Indivisible was organizing rallies at people's offices, their home districts, and you're right, like your insight is right. Like that was actually quite impactful. Like for people to see like 200, even 50 people, but if there's 200, 500 people outside their district office, like that resonates because those are voters and they're reflective of a bigger electorate then.
Right. So I want to talk about one more thing before we talk about the Intercept, and that is the defense budget, because I think it was very interesting yesterday to read this tweet by, I forget her name, she does comms for the House Democrats and for Jeffries, and she quote tweeted this guy who said, here's what she wrote. This is a $75 billion defense cut agreed to behind closed doors Appropriator Robert Adderholt, Republican of Alabama, says the deal between McCarthy and Chip Roy is for fiscal 2024 appropriations to be at fiscal 2022 levels. And he says, I think for those of us who believe in a strong defense, there's some concerns there. Now, my response to that is we're already spending an obscene amount of money on our defense budget. If you add stuff in that they don't currently count, it's close to $1 trillion. It's more than what Biden even wanted, you know, and there's literally no one threatening to attack us. You know, we've got bases in 800 countries. It's just a giveaway to the defense industry. And it seems like the Republicans are the sane party here. And I got this sense as a delegate for Bernie in 2016, because we were booing. We organized from the California section. We were booing a lot of the speakers, and we were chanting, you know, Black Lives Matter, ban fracking now, no more war, stop the TPP. You were there. And we got a hold of a memo that was sent to the Hillary delegates, and they were told to chant with us when we said Black Lives Matter, but when we said no more war, they were supposed to chant USA, USA, while we chanted no more war. And I was like, oh my God, when did the Democrats become the party of war? So what is your thinking about that? Do you think they're serious about?
You still have that? Did you write about that anywhere? Do you still have
that? I wrote about that in Truth Out. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really really perfect in a lot of ways. I mean, they kind of, in many ways, have always have been, like, both parties are parties of war. You know, the kind of mix of anti-war sentiment and isolationist sentiment has gravitated back and forth between the different parties. But yeah, like right now, there's not much of a progressive kind of foreign policy vision that involves an anti-war focus at all.
Well, that leads me to the question about the Intercept, because you broke some news about an hour before we went on the air, which is to say that the Intercept is, you know, going to wean itself off of the funding from Pierre Omidyar. How do you pronounce it?
Yeah, that's right. Something like that. Yeah.
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 And you're going to become a separate nonprofit. Now, the reason I was thinking about war is, you know, Glenn Greenwald, who founded that publication, famously left a year or so ago because he didn't like the direction. Maybe he was forced out. I'm not sure of the machinations there. But ever since then, he's been criticizing the publication. And some of the points he makes, I agree with. I do see a lot of articles in there that are very belligerent when it comes to Russia or China. And I've been doing a lot of shows on how we, you know, restarted the Cold War. We're making China the new boogeyman. And this is all for the benefit of the, you know, the weapons manufacturers, and et cetera, et cetera. I don't want to get into that, but I'd love for you to tell the viewers, you know, why this is happening now and what it means for the publication. And do you think his funding had anything to do with this direction that the publication took, that Glenn Greenwald and even I take issue with?
No, like he has had zero editorial involvement whatsoever. Like I met him for 30 seconds at a holiday party in 2017. Otherwise, have never met him, never talked to him. Don't have any idea even what his politics are. I know they range somewhere between like Hillary Clinton supporter and a never Trump Republican. Like he's somewhere, like his politics are somewhere in there. But he never, but that's where his politics were when he, you know, seeded it in the beginning and had Glenn and Jeremy as the founders of it, you know, who completely disagreed with his politics. He wasn't somebody who was going to get involved in the editorial mix. Glenn never raised any issues that I know of around like that type of foreign policy. I would disagree that we've done stuff that's belligerent. There's certainly stories that I agree with, certain stories that I disagree with. I think it's totally fine to criticize other foreign governments. Like I think we've done we did I think the most significant reporting based on a whistleblower when it came to the Iranian government. But I think in history, and I think it's fine I think it's good. Like it's just just because we're an American-based outlet doesn't mean that we can't look critically at the Chinese government, the Iranian government, the Russian government, the Ukrainian government, the Bolivian government, Brazilian government, like you name it.
I think the point is, though, that the mainstream corporate media do that already, and everybody thought of the
sure. I mean, we certainly shouldn't just we shouldn't repeat anything that they're doing. But if we have something new on that, but if there's some investigation that we've done, or that we get either from a whistleblower or a hacker or something, some information that's relevant to like the people either in this country or that country, like we shouldn't not publish it just because of who it might help or who it might hurt. Like that's not the role of a journalist. The role of a journalist is to get what you have and get it out there. And I don't think we should be playing favorites among different governments.
Well, what do you think the direction is going to be now that you're trying to go for foundation support and reader donations?
I don't actually know if we're going to go for foundation support. That's outside of my outside of my bailiwick. I'd rather we just be kind of supported by readers entirely. So over the last 5 years or so, we built up a very strong, small dollar, readership funding base, which has allowed us to be, I think, about 1/3 funded by readers. And so we got kind of a tie-off grant from the Omidyar network that's going to allow us to, take a year or two, like a couple years to kind of build up the rest of that so that we're then, fully independent. And so it's really, we control our destiny. It's up to us to do good work that people feel is worth supporting.
Well, I've kept you on a lot longer than I know you wanted to be. So I really appreciate your taking this time with us.
My pleasure.
Being the first guest of 2023 here on the Robust Opposition. I want to let people know that, my viewership is not nearly what it was when I started the show 6 years ago, when I was in the heart of the Bernie movement, and where I used to get a couple of thousand people watch the show. Now I'm lucky if I get a couple hundred. So it's really important, if you like this content, that you share it on your Facebook page. If you have a Twitter account, this is also being live streamed on Twitter and YouTube on my channels. And because I don't want to do this as a vanity project. I want to do this because I've got great guests like Ryan Grimm every week and great content. So Happy New Year, everyone. And my next show is going to be, speaking of great guests, it's going to be Thursday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, with Medea Benjamin, who has just written a book about Ukraine. And it's a very short book, 200 pages. I read it in 2 hours. And she's in the middle of her book tour. So tune into that, 9 p.m. Eastern and 6 p.m. Pacific. Thanks again, Ryan, and have a Happy New Year.
You too. Happy New Year.
Bye, everyone.